The order was given, a single command echoing through the vast command bunkers beneath Berlin. It unleashed an ambition born of a deeply held ideology, a belief that a sleeping giant to the east could be toppled with a swift, decisive kick. On June 22, 1941, this decision launched the largest land invasion in human history. For years, Adolf Hitler had envisioned a vast Germanic empire stretching across Eastern Europe, a new living space that would provide resources and consolidate power. This dream, articulated as early as the mid-1920s in his writings, it saw the Soviet Union as the ultimate ideological adversary and the prize. Confident from their swift victories in Western Europe, where France and the Low Countries had fallen in mere weeks, German strategists believed the Soviet communist state was fundamentally weak, a structure that would crumble at the first forceful push. A lightning-fast blitzkrieg campaign. It was designed to achieve victory within 6 to 8 weeks. Germany lacked the long-term resources for a drawn-out conflict. So speed was not just a tactic, it was an absolute necessity. To execute this immense undertaking, Germany amassed an invasion force of over 3 million men, a scale unprecedented in warfare up to that point. This colossal force was divided into 3 main army groups, each with a critical objective. Army Group North aimed for Leningrad, Army Group Center set its sights on Moscow. Army Group South pushed towards Kiev. From the outset, these tactics proved devastatingly effective, exceeding all expectations. Their panzer divisions slicing through Soviet defenses with alarming speed. The Luftwaffe quickly established air superiority, catching Soviet airfields by surprise, effectively neutralizing their air force on the ground. This allowed German ground forces to move with remarkable freedom, thrusting deep into the Soviet interior and encircling vast numbers of frontier armies. Hundreds of thousands of Soviet soldiers were captured or killed in these initial encirclement battles. The Soviet army found itself profoundly unprepared due to Stalin's purges of his officer corps. These purges had left the military severely depleted of experienced leadership. Furthermore, the Soviet Union had not had sufficient time to fortify its new western border, leaving its defenses vulnerable, unlike the French and British armies who had recognized when to withdraw. Soviet units, often poorly commanded and unable to adapt quickly, were repeatedly cut off and surrounded. These early weeks of Barbarossa suggested a dramatic and swift German triumph was imminent. Yet, a fundamental miscalculation lay at the heart of the German strategy. They had drastically underestimated the sheer size and resilience of the Soviet Union and its people. By Christmas 1941, German forces had captured some 3 million Soviet soldiers, a staggering figure that should have signaled the war's end. But the Soviets were still fighting. The vast distances the German panzers had covered began to work against them. Their supply lines stretched to a dangerous degree, while millions of encircled Soviet soldiers refused to cease fighting, becoming a persistent threat to German lines of communication behind the front. These pockets of resistance forced Hitler to make a pivotal and ultimately costly decision. Despite protests from his generals, he halted Army Group Center's direct advance on Moscow, diverting its powerful armored formations north and south to assist in destroying these lingering Soviet strongholds. This pause allowed the Germans to eliminate hundreds of thousands more Soviet soldiers, but it also offered an unexpected reprieve to the remaining Soviet forces. They used this precious time to reorganize, bring up fresh units, and construct a new formidable defensive line directly in front of Moscow. Though these new Soviet divisions were often undersupplied, with some men sharing rifles, and wearing civilian clothes, they were determined to defend their capital. Simultaneously, critical supplies, including equipment from Britain, began to arrive. These supplies came via Arctic convoys to Murmansk and Arkhangelsk. Perhaps even more significantly, the Soviets had managed an immense logistical feat. relocating vast swathes of their industrial capacity and factories eastward, beyond the reach of the advancing Germans. To the Ural Mountains, this allowed their war production to continue, even increase, bringing new tanks like the T-34 to the front lines. Then came the weather. October brought the infamous Soviet autumn, a period of alternating snow and thaw that transformed the unpaved roads of central Russia into an impassable, deeply muddy morass. The German offensive, already weakened, began to grind to a halt. Weakened by extended supply lines and fierce resistance, equipment designed for European roads failed in the mud, and the advanced armored formations, the spearhead of the Blitzkrieg, found their strength reduced by as much as 50%. As November drew to a close, with the Germans within 20 kilometers of Moscow, the autumn mud gave way to the full, uncompromising force of the Russian winter. Temperatures plummeted, freezing everything. By the end of November, more German soldiers were suffering from severe frostbite. More German soldiers required hospitalization from severe frostbite than combat wounds. Even as the advance stalled, the Germans could still view their position with optimism. Leningrad was under siege. Army Group Center stood at the gates of Moscow. An Army Group South had captured Ukraine and Kiev. They planned to resume their offensive with the new year. However, the Soviets had been preparing a momentous surprise. They had meticulously transferred the majority of their elite divisions from the Far East. Troops previously stationed to counter potential Japanese aggression in Mongolia. Intelligence had confirmed that Japan would not attack, freeing these forces. These were not inexperienced recruits. These were seasoned field divisions. Many from Siberia, already trained and equipped for extreme winter warfare. Unlike the exhausted and poorly clad Germans, these Soviet soldiers had winter camouflage, specialized equipment and weapons that could withstand the intense cold. On December 6, 1941, this formidable, fresh Soviet force launched a massive counterattack. In front of Moscow, the Germans, frozen, depleted, and utterly surprised, were forced onto the defensive. This led to a full retreat, and Operation Barbarossa, the grand ambition, had failed. Hitler's core assumption that Soviet society would swiftly collapse under pressure proved dramatically false. The Germans, who had staked everything on a quick victory, now found themselves embroiled in a protracted conflict. A war of production and attrition, fought deep within Soviet territory, fought through the unforgiving winter. They lacked the manpower and material reserves to sustain such a fight. They could not fight on equal terms with the Soviets. Though the immediate goal of eliminating the Soviet Union had been thwarted, the war in the East was far from over. In 1942, under Hitler's direct command, a new German offensive would begin. It would turn its attention south towards the Caucasus, and a city that would become synonymous with the conflict, Stalingrad, against the advice of his generals who still favored a push for Moscow. Hitler now prioritized the vital oil fields of Azerbaijan. He had, perhaps belatedly, come to understand that this was a war not just of territory, nor just ideology, but of raw materials and endurance.